Before launching into talking about NE and NI, I would like to review another aspect of introversion and extroversion in general. It won't pertain specifically to this video, but I think it's very useful in understanding the functions, particularly the rational functions. So thus far I have roughly defined extroversion as a focus on the objective divorced from the subjective, while introversion I've defined as viewing the objective through the lens of the subjective. One wants to work with the object, the other always assimilates the object into the subject by relating it to already present psychic material. Extroversion finds objective and outside factors to be reliable and internal factors to be fickle and untrustworthy, while introversion finds the internal and subjective factors to be reliable and outside factors to be fickle and untrustworthy. So, we could say that extroverted functions are focused on results, while the introverted functions are focused on the process. For instance, extroverted feeling is focused on the, quote, sentimental results, which is why they are always trying to affect other people and incur certain sentimental feeling results in them. Introverted feeling, on the other hand, is focused on the sentimental process, or the subject of happenings, which is why they are often associated with sincerity and passion, because they are more concerned with the integrity of a person's internal process. What people actually do, while it's important, is not as important as whether their heart is in the right place. And we can carry this over to the thinking functions as well. Extroverted thinking is focused on the functional results, or the goal, while introverted thinking is focused on the functional process, or the theories and ideas that are going on behind it. Now this can be carried over to the axes. In fact, one way to describe the axes that I'm beginning to favor, because I find it very useful, is to say that the FETI axis is concerned with functional processes having certain sentimental results and effects, like someone learning a language and then trying to speak it, while TEFI axis is concerned with sentimental processes having certain functional results, like someone building a fire so that they can swath out an existence for themselves. Now, moving on to NE and NI, if we define intuition as, quote, perceiving the possible associations, connections, and potential forms of a thing, unquote, we can thus initially define NE, or extroverted intuition, as perceiving the possible associations, connections, and potential forms related to an object in the world, or as John Barnes put it, observations. Much simpler definition there. Meanwhile, introverted intuition may be defined as perceiving the possible associations, connections, and potential forms relating to one's subjective impressions of the world, or as John Barnes puts it, impressions. There are three major differences that I want to review between NE and NI. First, and this is true in different ways for all of the E/I function dichotomies, but I'm bringing it up here. NE strives to be, as it was said of Socrates, a philosophy without a philosopher. In other words, it wants to keep its observations untainted from its personal experiences, which it perceives as biased and untrustworthy material. That may or may not be true, but that's how it usually sees them. NI, however, is a philosophy inseparable from the philosopher, in many ways at least, as it unconsciously regards the outside world as unreliable source material, and everything stable as coming from within. This is particularly evident, of course, when intuition is dominant. For instance, in the legendary debate between Foucault, and ENTP, and Chomsky, and INFJ, and I know I mispronounce names all the time, but hopefully I got those right. In a commentary on the debate, and I'll post a link for that below, Foucault's philosophy is described in the same words used for Socrates. The commentator actually says that his philosophy, where the philosopher constantly disappears from sight. In fact, at one point in the debate, Foucault has a strong negative reaction towards the mediator for asking him about his personal life during a philosophical debate. Foucault is frustrated by this because his whole goal with dominant extroverted intuition is to overcome and stand above that kind of unreliable static that's produced by the subject. To even imply that Foucault's observations have been affected by his own subjective life is a threat on the validity of his work, which relies on objective happenings and not subjective happenings, whether within himself or other people. Another example lies in the work of Foucault and Chomsky in general, and this was also discussed by John Barnes, so I'm only putting out a few of my own ideas with it. Foucault's philosophy is, in a very general nutshell, focused on understanding the outer social processes, power relations, and so forth that have appeared throughout history and thus affect our way of thinking. The focus here is on the objective happenings, the outside things affecting the subject, power relations affecting the subject, things affecting the subject and causing stuff to happen. Chomsky, however, takes an entirely different position. He is interested in discovering a fundamental human nature that transcends all of those objective power relations, something that resides within every single individual regardless of who or where they came from. Thus, his focus is on the subjective happenings. It is interesting to note, of course, that both of these philosophies are interested in discovering logical processes, which is evidence of their shared introverted thinking. But in any case, extroverted intuition is always concerned itself with objective associations and relations, while introverted intuition is always concerned with subjective happenings and motivations. This leads into the second point, which is taken from celebrity types. Extroverted intuition tends to connect the dots, while introverted intuition tends to fill in the blank. NE, because of its objective focus, perceives associations between actual objects, and thus is often connective and pattern-seeking. John Barnes gave a very good example of this, where, for instance, he said NE may associate the patent system in America with economic happenings on the Nile River. So these two real things are being connected. Another example that John Barnes gives is with Foucault. Yet again, Foucault's philosophy, is all about constantly discovering the objective relationships and connections between different ideas, powers, technologies, or whatever throughout history. It's all real stuff out in the world, and he's connecting the dots between them, finding patterns. Introverted intuition, on the other hand, works very differently because its subjective focus perceives associations not between objects, but between its impressions of various objects that are already assimilated into it. The motion is inwards and not outwards. It still plays the connect the dots game, but it all happens within its own psyche, between disparate concepts and ideas and impressions floating around in there, much like Yeghor's black hole analogy. It sucks all this material in and tries to relate it all to each other and smash it into a singularity. But the outside world, and quite usually the subject themselves, they don't see this process happening. It just happens, and the next thing you know, introverted intuition is making these associations out of nowhere. It's bringing this stuff out. It fills in the blank by drawing from the well of its psyche and not from objective relations, as NE does. For example, and this is an idea I've used before, but if you show extroverted intuition a red balloon, it may relate that balloon to the process by which latex is created and the state of the latex industry right now, and the decline in quality of red balloons, and what that will probably do to these other associated industries, which will affect some other stuff, and so on. Introverted intuition sees the red balloon, and NI thinks of this one film it saw a while back where the whole film was black and white except for this one red object, and it was used as this creative Hitchcock device to increase the suspense. So introverted intuition thinks, hey, wouldn't it be cool to make a film like that with a red balloon in it, and what if some Hitchcock character were in it? Or what if I put Hitchcock himself into it, and what if I made the film that it sort of described Hitchcock devices or used Hitchcock's devices in a way that you could learn about them? Because I think I saw another film that was like that, and it was really cool. But it was still like a film with a plot and everything, but it all actually teaches it, and there'd be this red balloon, and there'd be some significance attached to it, and it'd be really suspenseful and great, and I could add all these other elements I saw in these other movies, and off it goes. I'm very used to this kind of thinking. Next thing you know, extroverted intuition has drawn a duck out of the connected dots, or made a duck out of a bunch of scrap parts, while introverted intuition has ignored all the dots and ignored all the stuff and has drawn this random sketch of Alfred Hitchcock with a red balloon, and you're like, you have no idea what the heck he's talking about. So, another example is Kant, an INTP, and therefore prefers extroverted intuition, and Spinoza, an INFJ, who prefers introverted intuition, and specifically how they were influenced by previous thinkers. I take this example from celebrity types. Kant, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, I'm sorry, with auxiliary extroverted intuition performed a more traditional reading of his predecessors than Hume and Rousseau. Once again, I hope I'm pronouncing those right. I didn't look up to check the pronunciations before this, like some people have suggested that I do. I apologize. So let me start over. Kant, with auxiliary NE, made a more traditional reading of his predecessors than Hume and Rousseau. By that I mean he took them on their own terms and connected the dots. He wanted to know what Hume and Rousseau were really proposing and how these theories related to each other and to other concepts. Spinoza, however, whose influences were primarily Descartes and Bruno, and I'm pretty darn sure I pronounced those right, performed a more original reading in the sense that he didn't take them for what they were, but assimilated aspects of their thought into himself, and not necessarily, or in fact in his case, not ever really the core of their thought, but aspects that he particularly related to, and he sucked those into himself and he synthesized them and came up with something rather different from what he started with. Kant connects the dots while Spinoza fills in the blank. They express different kinds of imagination and creativity in their associations. This leads into the third point that I would like to make, and the one that is most often emphasized when talking about intuition. Extroverted intuition generally moves from the one to the many, while introverted intuition moves from the many to the one. Another way to put this is like Kant, extroverted intuition isn't so much interested in combining and condensing objects together, but in understanding them for what they are and seeing all the various potential connections that can be associated with that object. And so the motion's always outwards. You start with the object, you make a bunch of connections, and you want to get away from the subject to more and more associated objects, and then you repeat the creative process over again. Introverted intuition, like Spinoza did, has a very different end because it moves deeper into the subject and away from objects, causing the ideas to combine and mix and interrelate in interesting ways inside of the subject until an internal vision begins to appear within the psyche. And the motion's away from objects. You start possibly with an impression of an object, and then you move back into relating with more and more subjective objects, if you want to put it that way. Once again, I will relate an example from Foucault. Can you tell I kind of like Foucault? In Foucault's philosophy, he seeks to understand a particular time period and what ideas and values that time period represents and relates to, and how it compares with other time periods, and what logical structure of power relations models it. The contrasting NI attitude might be to observe a time period and then be inspired to develop NI's own associations and ideas about that time period, never actually making reference to any actual historic information about other things, but always referring back to already assimilated impressions of those time periods. So to a spectator, NE, or Foucault, appears innovative, connecting real things together and figuring out these power relations, while NI appears inventive because it kind of pulls these new ideas out of its head. So in some sense, NE is both limited and free in complementary ways to NI. In NI's perspective, NE is limited because it is limited to the material provided by objects. It's always tied and partially directed by them. However, NE, firstly, I'm not sure if that's actually true, but however, NE is freer in attitude than NI because of its desire to keep the creative process going. Like, for instance, for Foucault and Derrida, dominant NE types propose philosophical attitudes of inquiry and of never being fully satisfied, but always seeking more possibilities, making more connections, always questioning and perceiving and finding new things. For this reason, extroverted intuition has become famous for a free-spirited attitude, because it hates for things to be pinned down and never examined again. it sees that as a lack of insight into further complexities of the thing's nature. But NI, such as with Chomsky or Plato or Wittgenstein, whether or not they think it's possible, are always striving for such a pinning down, essentially, striving for a synthesis, striving to understand something completely enough that they can be satisfied. For Chomsky, it is a proper understanding of human nature. He is searching for knowledge as a noun, but Foucault and extroverted intuition are adopting more of an attitude towards knowledge. That is not to say that extroverted intuition as a function is not looking for truth or doesn't ever plan on settling things, because that's more, once again, that's more of a surface philosophy thing of whether or not you say that you're looking for truth, or if you are looking for truth. Bertrand Russell certainly was looking for truth in his sense of the word. But the important point that I want to make is that NE acts as more of an attitude, which should something be settled, it will immediately begin looking into other aspects for another problem. Or the truth or the structure that it does find and settle on is one where there's still plenty of room for continued examination. It's just it is sort of settled. While introverted intuition will more likely switch topics entirely once it feels that it's settled this, because it's found what it's looking for. Kind of like Wittgenstein, he sort of, quote, retired from philosophy for a while after he completed the Tractatus, because he did what he came for. You may have noticed that I myself demonstrate introverted intuition in a similar way in the structure of my videos. Even when I am trying to get a full sweep of the subject, I always end up stressing one point of view, and the reason for that being that when I develop a video and its script, I naturally want to find the point of view, or the, quote, keyword, or the definition, or if there are multiple definitions, then I want the best synthesis of those definitions that can account for the most material. I don't like it when things are multiplied, at least unnecessarily. I want them to relate to a common core. As a self-critique of, one of my problems is getting so focused on one fascinating perspective and feeling that it really does account for everything that I want to talk about, and only to find out a week later that by focusing so much on that I missed a whole other valuable aspect of the topic. And then, of course, I get fascinated with that new aspect, and I describe that to death, and then I miss another one, and this kind of continues. I don't know if any of you have seen that or think that, but I've seen that at least when making my videos. Because introverted intuition is able to take one objective thing and come up with dozens and dozens of internal connections moving away from objects without relying on any other objective things to do that, it can be very creative in that way, and all of those ideas originated from and are based on just one thing, however. Hence, another reason why introverted intuition tends to stress one viewpoint. It starts with one thing kind of happening and it can explode inwards from that. On the other hand, extroverted intuition is designed to work with lots of objective things and connect them all together, hence why it does not tend to have that kind of problem. It's always looking for more perspectives in the outside world because that's where it wants its creative process to take place. So I hope that made sense. I hope that was useful to you all. Thank you again for all the support. Extroverted Sensation and Introverted Sensation will be coming out next week. I'm not going to make any promises that I can get it done sooner just because of some time constraints. But if anything, it will be coming out next week. So thank you for watching, and I will do my best to answer any questions in the comment section.